The general election in Pennsylvania is over. Let's talk about it next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and as usual, I'm joined by my associate, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome to the show.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, Maura, since the last time we aired, we've had a presidential election.
Yes, we have.
We've had a general election for 2012. And I understand that single women played a large role in the presidential race. What was your account of this?
Well, you raise a good point, because there's shifting demographics in the United States, and the single or unmarried women, 67% voted for Obama. So we've got some changing things going on. I think the Republicans probably have a lot to learn from that. Something that apparently the Obama campaign embraced and understood. So it's an interesting point, but I think there's some lessons to be learned from this past election.
And Larry Sabato and his crystal ball at the University of Virginia actually predicted this thing right. But we have some of our own prognosticators here, some of the veteran reporters from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, one from the East and one from the West. We have, first of all, John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call. He's our veteran reporter from the East. John, welcome.
Thanks, Charlie.
And we have Brad Bumsted. Welcome back to the show, Brad, from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. And he's our veteran reporter from the West. So we're covering all the angles here today, Maura.
Yes, we are.
Let's start out with you, John.
Yeah.
What happened in Pennsylvania? It was believed that Romney had a chance of winning Pennsylvania. At the end, Romney and Ryan made appearances here. The momentum seemed to be shifting in Pennsylvania to Romney. What happened here in the Commonwealth?
I mean, that was certainly the narrative, wasn't it? You know, Governor Romney and Congressman Ryan came in for a weekend of pre-election blitzes, Saturday and Sunday. Tens of thousands of people in Harrisburg and Bucks County, and a surprise visit to Pittsburgh on the Monday before the election. What happened? A 1 million Democratic voter registration advantage is what happened. A heavy turnout in the Philadelphia area, a wave that came across the state, propelling President Obama and the statewide row offices to victory. But
Brad, here in Pennsylvania, we're a Republican state. We have a Republican governor, a Republican House, a Republican senator, a Republican Senate. We have a majority of our congressmen are Republican. Why didn't Pennsylvania go for Romney?
Well, Romney didn't campaign here till the end. Yeah. Obama carried the state by 5 points. I think the Romney campaign blew it by not being in here a month ahead of time and really contesting the state. Whether they could have won it or brought it down to 2 or 3 points, who knows? But they sure didn't really make a play in Pennsylvania, and I believe they could have. Whether that could have overcome the voter registration edge that John talks about, I don't know. But Pennsylvania voters are notorious ballot splitters, and they'll vote for Republicans or Democrats, whoever's the best candidate.
Well, we've been losing that status of swing state or battleground state over the last several years. Do you think it's gone completely after this election, or do you think in the future, will remain a swing state?
Well, I don't think we're a battleground state. We're a swing state in the sense that we'll vote for a Democratic president and a Republican legislature and a Republican governor. But we haven't been a battleground state. The last Republican to carry this state was George H.W. Bush.
Back in 1988.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. In presidential years, in any case, the state has, if not blue, then sort of purplish at least, because we did have those. Have Republicans take 13 of 18 congressional seats, so there was a pretty solid victory there. But if you look at across the rest of the ticket, the 5-point advantage to President Obama, the 3 statewide row offices going blue, we're not a battleground.
Well, we talked at the very beginning of the show about the changing demographics and what's been going on. I mean, some of the numbers are that the biggest number of white people voted for Romney since 1984. but he still couldn't win. 67% of the unmarried women voted for Obama. 60% of the young people voted for Obama. What sort of lessons are there going to be there in those changing demographics here in Pennsylvania?
Republicans need to learn how to reach Hispanic voters. They need to learn how to reach African American voters. By 2050, Latinos are going to outnumber whites in census
They're
data.
10% of the electorate right now.
They are now, and those are two groups, African Americans and Hispanics, that have traditionally voted Democratic. Republican inroads there have not been great, unless you count some pockets in Florida. Those are two areas of the electorate they're going to have to reach. Whites aren't reproducing at the same rate. They're having fewer children,
Fewer voters,
fewer potential, future voters. So that's going to be. If the Republicans are concerned about staying viable for the 20, 30, whatever next years, that's something they're going to have to adapt to.
Some believe that the demographic shift that's occurred is going to last for a long time, because if you look at the Republican voters, who tend to be over 50, white, as we've talked about, many of those are senior citizens. They're going to die, and these younger folks, the unmarried women, the Latinos, are going to get move into middle age, and so it's just going to push up that shift. So it's going to be difficult to overcome unless the Republicans, pull a rabbit out of a hat. Yeah. I'm not sure what it is.
It's probably not going to happen overnight.
No.
And we hear the line that of course Hispanics are family oriented, Hispanics are religious, Hispanics are largely Catholic. What better demographic group to be Republican than Hispanic? What's the disconnect, Brad?
I don't know, because for years in South Florida, in Miami, you'd see a huge segment of the Latino vote go for conservative candidates, and the disconnect has.
And those are Cubans primarily.
Yeah, they are Cubans. I suppose over immigration policies, I can only speculate.
Mm-hmm. John?
I wouldn't pretend to have any insight into the minds of Hispanic voters, but I mean, a lot of the there's now an ascendant Hispanic middle class. For a long time, it was very working class. It's a section of the electorate that's traditionally gone Democratic. That could be part of it, but beyond that, it would be pure speculation on my point.
Well, I asked some of my Facebook followers for some questions for today's show, and one in particular actually goes along with a headline that just appeared about businesses being concerned about their future because President Obama regained the White House. What if the voters went for the status quo? Why are we seeing a drop in the stock market? Why are businesses concerned? Why didn't they come out more in force to change things if they were concerned? Because
now the healthcare law is likely in play. And they're really wary of how that's going to affect them, what the costs are going to be. They see more regulation ahead under the Obama administration, not less. And the fiscal cliff in Washington, it becomes unclear how that's going to be, overcome because of the gridlock that may continue with a Democratic Senate, a Republican House, and Obama in the White House. And they have reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
Without resolution, there are tax increases coming and spending cuts coming. Businesses are historically allergic to tax increases of any kind, so that's got them a little bit jumpy. But if this so-called cliff is to be resolved, it's going to have to include some mix of revenue increases and entitlement cuts, and you can see businesses getting jumpy about that.
John, let's turn to you, and let's turn to the U.S. Senate race here in Pennsylvania that we just had. As Romney seemed to pick up momentum and steam at the end of the campaign season, we find that there was also the belief that maybe Tom Smith could do something unimaginable just a few months ago, and that is beat a Robert Casey in Pennsylvania, beat a name that's a political legend. And he certainly was committing his own personal resources to this, and he seemed to be matching Casey TV commercial for TV commercial, in some cases exceeding him. There was the thought that perhaps he might even win. What happened in the U.S. Senate race?
Yeah, well, that didn't happen. We'll get that out right there. Mr. Smith, a coal executive from Armstrong County out in western Pennsylvania, pumped $17 million of his own money into the race. Still fell short on election night. He did come pretty close in the polls for a little while there, came within 3-4 points of Senator Casey. Senator Casey kind of woke up the last couple of weeks of the race. Might have to thank former Governor Ed Rendell for that, for going up to Scranton, giving him a bit of a kick in the pants and saying that he was running a non-campaign. You saw Senator Casey come out with a set of very, aggressively on the stump attacking Mr. Smith, and then a television advertisement that very clearly articulated what he'd been doing for the last 5 years with the payroll tax cut, some trade stuff, keeping Harley-Davidson his efforts to help keep Harley-Davidson in York, for instance. So between sort of that late wake up and again superior Democratic registration numbers and superior Democratic turnout
and name recognition,
that was enough to put him over the top.
I heard a funny comment on election night from a pundit saying that these kids might be a little bit upset that their parents are spending so much of their money on these these elections, that they might be saying, don't leave us the $17 million instead of the.
It was a bad night for conservative billionaires. That's for sure. They spent a ton of money and nothing changed. And what are we going to do about that? What are they going to do about that? Maybe decide how they're going to spend better next time. Far be it for me to advise Sheldon Adelson.
Yes.
Brad, what's your take on the U.S. Senate race here between Tom Smith and Bob Casey?
Tom Smith made a run at it. I thought he would do better than he did, but Bob Casey was the first. It was the first race declared on election night, and he ultimately won by 9 points. Even though Smith had attacked Casey for being Senator Zero and that he didn't stand for anything
or pass any legislation in 6 years.
Yeah, the Casey name means a lot. And I think to the extent that people do know him, Bob Casey is just a genuinely decent man, ethical guy, and I think that comes through when you see him. And sometimes it's about likability, often. It's not all these details over Medicare and everything else. Do you like this candidate or not? And given the name and his affable personality, I think that had a lot to do with it.
We were talking a couple minutes ago about Pennsylvanians being notorious ticket splitters, and this could have been an instance where Republicans could have ticked the box for Mitt Romney and then gone straight to Bob Casey, or Reagan Democrats who were on the fence about President Obama maybe went Romney and then went to Bob Casey. That's entirely possible.
Okay, we'll be back with more right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals to provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Underwriters of America, a better way for truck insurance. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs. And now an update from the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors.
Pennsylvania is facing a snowballing bill expected to mushroom from $40 billion today to more than $65 billion by 2021 to cover retirement benefits for more than 800,000 state and public school employees. Service cuts and tax hikes are predicted, and if some get their way, townships will feel the pinch of the pension crisis in other ways too. For more on that, here again is Jill Ercolino.
Pension reform is shaping up to be one of 2013's hottest legislative topics. And while it's not the sexiest of subjects, townships need to pay close attention. Why? Because the state lawmakers and others look for solutions to Pennsylvania's $40 billion problem, the result of woefully underfunded retirement funds for state workers and public school teachers. Talk of consolidation has been creeping into the conversation. It happened at recent hearings hosted by the Pennsylvania Employee Retirement Commission, and it's happening despite the fact that many local pension plans are in solid financial shape. That, however, hasn't stopped at least one high-ranking state official from using pension reform as a platform to promote consolidation. The idea? Lump all municipal retirement programs into a single statewide system. This option doesn't make much sense to PSAT's Executive Director David Sanko, who says the consolidation advocates need to face the facts.
The state and the public school employee systems are bigger, but guess what? They're not better. In fact, they're at the root of this whole pension mess. What's ironic, however, is that some state officials are suggesting that the Commonwealth is better equipped to oversee municipal pension plans than the people on the ground. Really? That's not a solution. It's an attempt to make everyone swallow the same bad medicine.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. We're talking about the recent general election, and Maura and I are being joined this particular week by John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call and Brad Bumsted from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. We also want to remind you, you can catch us on the YouTube and, of course, in our archives at thevoiceofpa.net, and check out our website at Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. We haven't talked about the state row offices yet. Brad, let me turn to you. We had a very lively campaign here for Attorney General. And, of course, we have our first Democratic elected Attorney General and our first female Attorney General. Could you fill us in a little bit about what happened? This was a high-profile race, wasn't it?
It was the most high-profile race among the row office races. What happened overall is the Democrats swept these offices. Kathleen Kane, Democrat from Lackawanna County, a former prosecutor there, led not only the row office races, but the whole ticket. Most people don't realize she won by 15 points, garnered over 3 million votes, had more votes than Barack Obama or Bob Casey. This is pretty phenomenal. Why did that happen? Well, there are a number of different reasons, but she had a tough primary contest where she spent about $2 million of her family's money on TV ads and became known, so she had some name recognition. Bill Clinton had endorsed her in the primary and the general election. Being a woman helped her. I think people wanted to give a woman a chance as Attorney General.
And a very telegenic woman.
Yes. And she made this a referendum, more or less, on Republican Governor Tom Corbett, whose popularity is down, you might say, at the moment. His job approval numbers have been, I guess in August, hit the lowest point that they have for a while. And most importantly, she struck a nerve with Pennsylvanians when she talked about a need to investigate Corbett's investigation of Jerry Sandusky. Now, why, you might ask? Well, because it took 33 months to investigate and arrest Sandusky, who was later convicted of being a serial pedophile. Kane wants to know why that couldn't have been done earlier with one case, with two cases. And I think the reason this struck a nerve with people is every day people pick up the newspaper and they see teachers arrested for molesting a child. They're yanked out of school in one day. They're handcuffed and taken off. So why was Sandusky free all this time, and why wasn't he arrested? Now, from Corbett's perspective, he says, look, you needed to, against a guy like Jerry Sandusky, who had a great reputation, was a revered coach, you needed the weight of the evidence. So he waited till he got 10 victims who could testify. So there was crushing weight of evidence. There was no doubt about Sandusky's guilt. And Corbett says if you did it on one case, as she suggests, you may have lost. The big issue is the use of the grand jury. Corbett used a grand jury to do this whole investigation because it also reached up into the administration of Penn State, and there was a cover-up. She says she wouldn't have used a grand jury. A grand jury meets once a week every month. So clearly, 4 weeks of work take 4 months. That was part of the reason for this delay. But it's going to be an ongoing issue. She's going to investigate. And sorry if I'm taking too much time.
No, not at all. Now, do you think that the sweep of the row offices, John, is a referendum on Governor Corbett?
I think it is to a degree, and if you're Governor Corbett and his administration, you're probably glancing a little uncomfortably at the Finance Building and Strawberry Square, the headquarters for those respective offices. At least in Eugene DePasquale, the state house member from York, who was elected Auditor General, he's talked about being an aggressive fiscal watchdog. Mrs. Kane, who's been now the Attorney General, has talked about using that office very aggressively. You had Jim Cawley, the Lieutenant Governor, at a pre-election day rally, saying she was going to use the office as a political weapon, as kind of a term of disparagement. They got some chuckles out of Democrats who think Governor Corbett had used it as a political weapon. against them. I actually tweeted that during the course of the rally and got slammed with a bunch of replies from disgruntled Democrats. But I think Brad is right about the Penn State thing. I think that more than anything else was sort of a determining factor in the race. It was an issue that was very much in Mrs. Kane's wheelhouse. She prosecuted sex crimes while she was an assistant district attorney in Lackawanna County. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Dave Freed, the Republican candidate, who Mrs. Kane tied successfully to Governor Corbett.
It wasn't hard.
It wasn't hard at all.
Yeah.
He said he wasn't there when Governor Corbett made him the, quote, hand-picked candidate. Well, he may not have been on the call, but the call certainly took place, and Governor Corbett ushered out John Rafferty, a state senator from Montgomery County, who's going to be Mr. Freed's only primary challenge. That speaks really to the difference between not having a primary and having a primary. Mrs. Kane came out of that fight with Patrick Murphy, tested with name recognition. Dave Freed had a comparably easy time of it, and when it came down to the actual general election fight, that made a pronounced difference.
Going on that point, Brad, comparing the two TV campaigns, which are the only source of information for many of the voters around the Commonwealth, it seemed that Kathleen Kane's ads were very polished, always in color. She looks great on camera. She has Bill Clinton on camera with her. Whereas, I don't know, the one Freed TV commercial in particular that I remember, his hair was standing partially up. It was, I believe it was a black and white commercial. He's wearing a disheveled suit. He looked a sight. And I was wondering who would allow that on screen. He's a very handsome man, and I can't believe that his team couldn't do a better TV commercial.
You're absolutely right, and he is a genuinely nice guy. He's an experienced prosecutor. Mm-hmm. He has more experience than Kathleen Kane, and his ads were terrible. But I do believe hers were just great. I mean, as you point out, in color, they show her out in a jacket with law enforcement at the scene of a crime. Bill Clinton, maybe there was an American flag in there, I can't remember.
Probably.
But the other thing, too, that took place is an outside group, the Republican Attorney General's Association, paid for an ad, the very first ad that aired in the Philadelphia area, attacked Kane for the cases she handled, essentially saying she went soft on a rapist. Well, it turns out it wasn't really her case. She had been on duty and signed in, when the person was booked, and another prosecutor handled it, so it was wrong. So the Freed campaign got off to a bad start to begin with, and the Philadelphia media really hammered this blown ad that was factually inaccurate.
And she actually handled that really masterfully, because later on in the campaign, a Democratic group came in and hammered Dave Freed, and there were some factual inaccuracies in that advertisement as well. And Mrs. Kane came right out and said, "This is wrong. The ad's misleading." She said she disavowed it and distanced herself from it, and she called on Mr. Freed to do the same thing with that attack ad from earlier in the campaign. And Dave Dave said he was disappointed by it, but he never specifically disavowed the ad, and that was I think she handled that really well toward the end of the campaign.
Right, the first week that the Republican attack ad came out, he wouldn't really say anything about it, and
that's right.
It was only towards the end that he said, he hopes this campaign is conducted with honesty and integrity. He didn't even really address the inaccuracies.
Yeah, we talk about the ads. It's not as if they had amateurs handling their media for them either. Mrs. Kane had Neil Oxman in the campaign group doing her media. Dave had John Brabender out of Pittsburgh, and we had two well-trained, well-paid media people doing this stuff. And for whatever reason, Dave's ads, didn't resonate.
Now, everyone was saying that if Romney couldn't win in this economy on the federal level, then the Republicans are really in deep trouble. What can Governor Corbett learn from this? Apparently, it isn't the economy, or I think we would have seen some different results. What are the next 2 years going to bring in terms of issues and policies?
That's an all-encompassing question. I think that for one, he's going to be fending off these, he may call them attacks, they would call them investigations and audits of his administration from two watchdogs, not only Kane, but Eugene D. Pasquale, who is a real bulldog, and will go after the Corbett administration policies. He says the first thing that he's going to look at is water protection in the Commonwealth in face of Marcellus shale drilling. a really hot button issue. So he's going to have that. Corbett would like to privatize the liquor stores, but that becomes more difficult with the Senate Democrats having gained 3 seats, where it's now 27-23, and the Senate was never really enamored of privatizing the liquor stores anyway. It's the House that's been slightly more interested in that. At least the Majority Leader Turzai is hell-bent on doing it.
It seems like one of the unsung public servants in recent Commonwealth history here has been our outgoing Auditor General, Jack Wagner, of course, from the West. John, any thoughts on Jack Wagner's contributions while in office, and what are his future plans?
A hardworking guy. He certainly tried to maximize the possibilities afforded by the office. It seemed like for a while they were getting like a press release a week about some sort of news conference that Mr. Wagner was holding.
Rendell.
Yeah, and one assumes that that's a setup for what we all understand to be a bid for Pittsburgh mayor fairly soon. So that seems to be the next political track for Jack.
And Linda Kelly, Brad, the current Attorney General, what's she going to be off doing? Do you have any clue at this point?
I don't personally, but I suspect she'll go practice law. Politics is part of the agreement you make when you're an appointed Attorney General. You go and meet with all the senators individually, and part of the deal is, yes, you'll get confirmed for this, but you don't run.
Right.
So she can't run now. Of course, she could come back and run, as Corbett did.
Okay, we're winding down here, so just in our last minute or so, what was the biggest surprise that you both saw in this election? Any big surprises?
I think the margin by which Casey won surprised me. I thought he'd win, but I thought by 3 or 4 points. And the Kathleen Kane rise to stardom.
John?
The speed with which the Casey race was called on Tuesday night, it was literally like an hour after the polls closed, and he'd taken that race. I mean, that was one that I was watching pretty closely, and it seemed like it could have been potentially on the bubble, but by the time we got to election night, Senator Casey had opened that 5 or 6 point lead in most public polls. It seemed like he was back out in front again. That was the one surprise. The other surprise is I thought maybe Republicans might have had a shot at one of the raw office seats, potentially with Auditor General. Maybe John Marr could have given Eugene.
And he came the closest.
And he did come the closest. That could have been one that flipped, so you would have gone 2 out of 3 Democratic rather than 3 for 3.
Okay. All right. Well, we thank you very much for your insights. We want to have you come back and see how these new office holders are doing very soon. And we will be with you again next week on Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.